Restart. Okay, so thank you for attending today's webinar. So we are going to talk about digital health as a mainstream healthcare. So we have six distinguished panelists to share their insight. So after my introduction, that we'll have six speakers to share their insight about what's the barrier they experience through their work and then any potential solutions. So from starting from the end layer, and after that actually we will turn around in the count like a clockwise direction. So Emily first start, you start, and then after that Tom you start, and then Eric and Karsten, Jay, and Arashi. I didn't see Arashi, but maybe he joined. He is now in UK, and so we'll have like a 5 minutes each speaker to share. And then after that, we'll have an interactive discussion session. So, and then with the Q&A. So during the each speaker's talk, if you have any specific question to the specific speaker, then you can have your question in the chat, and then we'll take care of after the first session, and then we'll take care of in the interactive discussion that your question will be focused on. And for the second session, the Rebecca, she's a professor at Boston University School of Medicine, so she will take care of this session as a moderator. Okay, so without any delays, so we'll start our first session.
Hi, Alex. Can you allow me to share, please?
Oh yeah, yeah, I already did. Yeah, you can share. Yep.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Amber Brammer. I'm a scientist, entrepreneur, and the idea for our company, Ample Biosolutions, which is precision health, really analyzing those dynamic RNAs or gene expression by druggable target, came out of the Human Genome Project when I was a PI at the National Institutes of Health during the 2000s. So by the middle of that decade, we realized that there were 20,000 RNAs in every cell of the body that could be off and on. But really, as scientists, we only understood what about 100 of those did. So we focused the company on grouping those dynamic RNAs by druggable targets and focusing on inflammation, in particular autoimmunity. This is very challenging, and the number of individuals with both inflammatory or autoimmune conditions are increasing year by year. There's especially an unmet need in socioeconomically disadvantaged individuals and certain ancestries. In addition, we've developed a mobile app to be able to interact with individuals wherever they live, and working with our lab and barcoded tubes and at-home collection devices, really being able to provide precision health to the community of the United States, regardless of where people live, their economic status, or their ancestry. I'm going to highlight here the differences in the therapeutic areas that we're focused on. On the top, lupus, dermatology like psoriasis and eczema, and scientific wellness are disease areas that Ample Biosolutions is bringing clinical care products to market. We also work with a variety of pharma across disease areas, helping them know what the signature is of the individual that may respond to their therapeutic. And in the lay vernacular, the common word for this is a complementary biomarker. We validated across disease areas, and we have cardiology, nephrology, infections, neurology. We just published our first paper, multiple sclerosis. We have some work in Alzheimer's and autism, and in lung cancer. These are all open for licensing and co-development and partnering. Very big picture, Ample Biosolutions has developed a solution to address the challenge of inflammation, which is ever increasing, partly because of the American lifestyle, but also because of all the environmental and the epigenetic factors that are allowing genetics, what we inherit, to translate into dynamic gene expression. At the end of the day, all of Ample's technology and our tests do a few things. One is to monitor inflammation, which for someone with an autoimmune disease like lupus is predicting a flare before it happens. And then reading out what are the druggable targets that could decrease that inflammation, that could blunt or even prevent that oncoming flare. And this is all fueled by our in-house proprietary predictive explainable AI algorithms and our RNA analytic platform. We're the only entity in the world that covers 100% of all RNAs. We're very happy to be part of the ARPA-H program. They just had their first year anniversary last year. We published in very high profile journals, and we're recognized both in our home state of Virginia, but across the country. I just want to spend the last 2 minutes of my time digging into the technology so everybody can understand how we're addressing this unmet need. Ample's co-founder, Dr. Peter Lipsky, was a former clinical and scientific director of NIAMS at the NIH, and I ran a lab in human and mouse immunology and genetics during the Human Genome Project. The challenge in particular of inflammation and autoimmunity is heterogeneity within the population, in both the normal, healthy population, as well as those that are diagnosed with an autoimmune or inflammatory condition. So simplistically, I'm showing a slide that brings that message home. This is a heat map, which is a way of translating a lot of very big data into something that's easily understandable. So red is up, blue is down, every up and down is one individual. Every horizontal line is one of the Ample's tools, grouping druggable targets, the cells, the pathways, the functions. This is lupus, about 1,500 of the over 20,000 individuals that we've looked at to date. And you can see patterns. Some individuals, everything's up, others, everything's down, and there are a lot in between. The take-home message is there are groups of individuals that have a particular pattern or genomic fingerprint that can be utilized by a pharma or biotech as a complementary biomarker to enrich for those that may respond to the therapy being tested. Or the flip side, in clinical care, to be able to have a report that says you're stable on the meds you're on, or no, these are the things that are abnormal, and doctor and patient can address that. This is going to be my last slide to stay on time. And all of what I'm showing you is on the website, amplebiosolutions.com. This heat map is showing lupus. There are 8 endotypes or 8 subgroups of lupus. This is why drug development has been so challenging. There have only been 2 drugs, biologics, approved by the FDA for lupus in the last 10 years. Very excitingly, UCB and Biogen just had a successful phase 2 trial, partially because they were using genomics and genomic fingerprinting to be able to understand the individuals that may respond to the drug being tested. So just looking at a heat map, and I'll wrap up with this. Individuals in this first group The red means up. They have lymphocytes in their blood as they should, as a normal individual. The bottom is blue. Inflammation is negative. They're good to go on whatever regimen they're on. This is about 5% of the lupus population that agrees with epidemiology. People in the other 7 groups have either overlapping or unique druggable targets that are abnormal. Patient and doctor will receive a report with that individual's genomic fingerprint of dynamic gene expression. This is RNA, not DNA, that are abnormal in that period of time, with saying yes, no, they're stable on their meds, they're not likely to flare, and then what are the targets that are abnormal. And physicians know that the drugs they prescribe. A lot of autoimmune diseases, including lupus, over 99% of patients in the United States are receiving a drug that's off-label, and it takes 5 years, if ever, to get to a drug regimen that works. Ample is a precision health company, both with a mobile app and blood and biopsy tests across a wide variety of disease areas. We've done the work so that our platform covers all ancestries in the United States. We're focused on diseases that, especially like lupus, are adversely affecting socioeconomically disadvantaged individuals. And I'm really happy to be here with this group of people, happy to answer questions at the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think that we maybe have more time in after this session. So we want to hear from you about that, especially that in your field that you're working in especially the AI in healthcare as a part of the digital health. So I want to hear from you about what's the challenge to be included as your solution as a mainstream healthcare, for example, precision health, and what you think about this potential solution in later. So I think that Rebecca joined, so he will take care of that in later. Okay, next, Tom.
Thank you, Alex.
Yes, hi everybody, and thank you very much for coming today to listen to this. I hope that you're going to enjoy what I have to say. I'm coming at this from a very different point of view than Anne-Marie. I am neither a scientist nor a clinician. I have been part of the founding team or launched several digital health companies. I'm doing that again, which may prove that I'm a glutton for punishment, though I have to say actually that in certain respects, the legal and regulatory environment is actually getting better and better for digital health companies. And I'm on the care provision side. So from 2016 to 2021, I was the CEO of a behavioral telehealth company called iHope Network, which we grew into 7 states with 2 more on the way. We were doing talk therapy. We were doing it for organizations like Harvard University's Counseling Center and also St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. So you can imagine the level of quality that we were going for to get those clients. And we sold it to Headspace in 2021. More recently, I was the chief of clinical operations for a startup called Imago Rehab, which is focused on stroke rehab for the hand, so a much narrower focus. But many of the same kinds of challenges. How do you roll out multiple states? How do you keep your team on target? How do you maintain morale in a company where people never see each other? This experience that we're all having right now on Zoom is how we had all of our corporate meetings once Zoom came along. Before that, we did them as teleconferences. And so I want to talk a bit about that. And then I'm now the founding CEO of a company that's focused on delivering better pelvic health solutions called Restoration Medicine. So a very important aspect of this in any company is how you build your corporate culture, how you keep people motivated and so on. And in completely virtual environments or 90 or 95% virtual environments, that's new for a lot of people. And I'm sure you've all seen headlines about, Amazon saying, or I guess Salesforce saying everybody has to return to work, and then there's outrage among the people who have to return to work and so on. We never had the opportunity to tell everybody to return to work because they were always at home in the first place. And one of my pet peeves when I go to talks about how you operate in digital environments is people always start talking about how they like to meet in person, which seems to me to be beside the point. So I'm going to say, first of all, to make this successful in these environments, we were successful. We had very high morale. We had lower staff turnover than most medical organizations do. One thing was the whole leadership team was very committed to activities that were designed to help in that virtual environment. Really basic stuff, but you need to recreate the opportunity for people to meet you in the hallway. So there were several times a month where I calendared just an open half hour in my calendar, and I'd send the invite to everybody in the company and say, this is optional, but you can show up if you want to, if you have anything you want to discuss. I think it's very important to do that both during business hours and have some time slots after business hours. That's especially important in a care delivery organization because your clinical team doesn't work 9 to 5, right? And as somebody who is in a leadership role, you need to be showing that you're available outside of that 9 to 5 time slot as well. And sometimes I'd be on the Zoom for a half an hour and nobody would show up, and other times people would show up. Every time somebody showed up, they would then go and talk about it with their colleagues. Which I think is a very important thing. Another really important thing, we would have regular meetings, but topics for regular meetings, wins, was very important for us because it gives you an opportunity to show that you're behind the staff. And I'll give 2 quick examples of wins. One, we had a clinician who was treating a student at a very top tier Massachusetts college who lived on the West Coast, and her West Coast license got slowed down by bureaucracy. She was the kind of person who puts in a perfect application. And I phone called her state senator in the West Coast state and said, can you speed this up? And they did. And she was able to start treatment for that, or continue treatment for that student when they went home for the summer, which was very important for that student and helped them graduate. Another example, whenever we had a patient safety incident, we never lost a patient, which I'm very proud of, but we did have patient safety incidents around suicidality and around domestic violence, among other things. We had an escalation path that was all medical, but we would also, after the crisis was resolved, I'd give them a phone call and just thank them for doing a good job. And the effect, several of them said in my previous employment, I was afraid of situations like this and afraid of how the organization would respond. And getting this phone call saying thank you really means a lot to me. And again, those kinds of things are a win, and we would do general recognition for a successful safety incident as well. And the other thing, you want people talking in group meetings, you want people talking a little bit about their life and what's going on. We'd have tell the team about your hobby. As we grew and the staff numbers went in from 10 or 12 into the dozens, tens, and north of 100, we had to move that down into smaller team meetings. But again, it was very helpful. And then as the CEO, of course, I was on the road a lot for sales purposes. And I'd look up people's addresses and invite them and their families out to dinner. I think it's very important when you're doing something like that to invite the family, both because it shows kind of a view of how you look at the people who work for the company, and also because it really helps nip in the bud any thought that something untoward is going on, right? Which is not the point of doing that. So that worked really well for us. As I say, our employee retention was higher. We benchmarked, and it was higher than typical medical centers. We did do employee surveys. People did feel that they were cared for, that the company cared about them. And it also had really positive effects on things like reporting, morale, people going that extra mile for their patients, because we fostered that culture of we're caring and supportive of you. And that helps people be supportive and caring of their patients. And so that's what I have to say about that topic, though I'm more than happy to take questions further on. The second thing that I want to talk about is how did we retain patients? And this actually also helped us retain clinical staff, both in the intake process, where, I'm sure well, hopefully many people here are aware that referrals to intake to somebody becoming a patient, you can easily lose half your referrals. Um, and especially in areas like behavioral health or stroke rehab, where people are not necessarily, there may be stigma, or they may have barriers, even not only to being able to understand technology, but to actually use it in the case of a stroke patient. Um, so when one of the things that we did was design our intake process around multiple outreach, around multiple types of outreach. So you really do need to be texting. The other thing is that, I think the first iPhones were introduced in 2007 or 2008, right? So anybody who was under the age of 20 when those came out, they text, they don't talk. And those people now are about 36 or 37 years old. And that means if you see a patient coming in or a referral coming in from somebody who's under the age of about 40, if you're not texting them, they're probably not going to become your patient. But if they're over the age of 50, if you don't telephone them, they'll probably not become your patient. So we actually created two separate paths for the two separate age groups. And that increased our intake rate by 3 or 4 percentage points across the board. And then on top of that, in a lot of cases, the patients that I'm working with, that my teams are working with, are people who have a condition which might not be chronic, but that does take some time to resolve. Right? It's not like a surgery where you go in, the surgeon spends however many hours and then you leave and you're pretty much done, or taking an antibiotic, right? If you're suffering from anxiety, you may suffer from anxiety for your entire life if you're unfortunate and have a serious mental illness, or it may be temporary. The same thing, if you've had a stroke, your recovery journey is you can actually continue to get better for months and even years, which I realize is not what people are necessarily told when they have a stroke. But there really is an opportunity to, our brains are much more plastic than I was told, at least when I was young. And you can continue to gain function for a long period of time. But you need to encourage people to continue to be involved in their own care in order to do that. And I'm going to ask, it's October 31st, it's Halloween. What was your mood on on August 7th of this year? And of course, there's nobody on this call who can answer that, right? Our brains don't work that way. We don't think that way. And if you're recovering from anxiety, there's a measure called the GAD-7. And if you don't have anxiety right now, you're probably going to score a 3 or a 4 on this survey. And if you have very high anxiety, it might be a 16 or a 17. By giving patients back a graph of their progress on that, they could actually see how they were doing. And that encouraged them to come to their next appointment. The same measure exists for depression, called the PHQ-9. And I'll briefly share one that we put together for stroke, because I think the design of this is also very important. If it's a single measure, that's great. This is a fake patient that we put together for Imago Rehab. But in this case, so FMA is a measure of function after you've had a stroke. And here we wanted patients to see their progress, right? So, but we also wanted to give them an average. So this patient, you can see at the start, we're showing that they're doing a little better than average. Afterwards, they're continuing to make progress, but they're actually making progress a little bit more slowly. But that's because they weren't very disabled in the first place. The second thing that we did was we gave them these color bars so that they could see where they were starting. And this effectively is a measure of how injured they were by their stroke, right? So down in the red are people who really lost a lot of function. And then up in the green are people who had much less disability in their immediate post-stroke. And so here you've got a very good view of how you're doing. And again, what's the payoff? And then the therapist would relate this back to things like being able to put their own pants on, open their own refrigerator, cook their own meals. At Imago, we had people who had lived with their parents for 4 or 5 years, started with us, and their goal had always been to live independently again. And they were living independently, moving out after about 8 or 9 months of treatment. So again, these kinds of things, how you present data to people, the importance of presenting data to them, it can be really, really powerful in terms of patient retention, in terms of keeping them engaged. It also helps a lot with clinicians because they compare their patients to see how they're doing against each other. You do have to put in some caveats on that. We had at iHope, we had a patient whose anxiety score never dropped below 16, which is a really high score and is a really difficult way to live. And normally you would think, oh, that's an example of a bad therapist, but the therapist actually got them through 3 years of an Ivy League school and they graduated successfully. So I would argue that that was actually evidence of a really top performing therapist who was able to help this person achieve their educational goals. And with that, I'll say thank you all for listening to these stories. I hope that they've been helpful. And Alex, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Tom. In the interactive section, actually, we want to hear from you more that because what you talk about today is there are out there, to my understanding, there are many kind of the digital health solutions can have. For example, that there are some kind of like a digital therapeutics solution to take over like a burnout of the employee burnout or other things like to care about the patient. So I think that as your businessman, not in the technical line, and that somebody actually approaching you that here is a good like a digital health solution to like solve your problem, and what's the best way actually can be included in your like to solve your problem and any challenges, and then in your view there is any solution to for example there are out there a lot of the digital health innovators to try to get the opportunity. So we want to hear from you. So maybe Rebecca will focus on that in the second session. Okay, thank you. Yep. So next, Eric.
Yes, let me get off mute. I'll share. I think I have a couple of slides I'll flip up here, but I honestly really just appreciate talking to everybody and having kind of be able to join some of the great thinkers here, as some of who we've met previously and others that are completely new. So, and able to share my experience. So I am, I guess, a blend here. I am a clinician by background. I'm a critical care pharmacist. Spent a decade at the bedside in cardiac surgery, and then led population health, led into really value-based care, pivoted into the payer world. I would say my career is a series of 90-degree pivots. So led a lot of transformation at a large Blues plan, or actually the parent company of a large Blues plan, and then I have since ventured off into health and life sciences. Really, with the kind of the main thing is that I'm a constant learner, trying to figure out what we could do to one, change patient care, and how to bring in new solutions and kind of leverage what I've learned through this as to how to bring new things to market, how to make an impact, and find ways where many can win. You know, whether that's we can manage it at a lower cost, we can get better access to care for patients, and ultimately it really help bring the clinician's mindset to this piece that help things get simpler. I mean, that's really if we can bring that relationships change everything in my mind. And if we can't, and digital is a path to do that. So I think that those are the kind of guiding principles. The one thing that I would say, where I am now, I'm at GE Healthcare as a startup that was acquired by GE Healthcare about 2 years ago, called Caption Health. But I lead an end-to-end turnkey services solution, clinical services solution around AI diagnostics for echocardiograms. But before I show you kind of what we have there and give you a little bit of mind's eye where that is, a couple of the barriers I'll kind of highlight that they transcend a number of different things here, but I think that one that I'll start with is the evidence. Right. I think getting evidence or guidelines into practice, I'm not sure if any of you guys know this, but it's about 17 years from the time that evidence is generated until it actually changes care, right? And actually grows legs. And, sometimes it's a little bit earlier, sometimes it may be a little lag. In past life, I did some work with the Choosing Wisely guidelines that started in 2012, and it was 2019. I was leading strategic initiative with it, and I was like, this doesn't feel innovative, but it just comes down to the fact that things don't hit the streets and they're not adopted well. And I'll go a little bit deeper in that. Is like that's one thing for evidence in clinical practice. I think the other thing you have to bag is how long does it take for those types of things in clinical practice to actually elevate into changing scope of practice, evolving scope of practice, evolving policy, evolving regulation to allow that evidence to actually make an impact. Because I think that is a fundamental barrier too. And that also cascades over into variability in payer benefits and reimbursement around that too. So how those medical and benefits policies are constructed are also partly related to variability in the states and how the scope and practice of clinical practice, whether that's medicine, pharmacy, nursing, cascade, it really gets rather nuanced, to say the least. And then do that in the digital world or bringing innovation in, it really can bog down things rapidly. But I would say that those are things that kind of drive me as I start thinking of bringing things to market. So I'm going to serve up a couple of quick, if I can share my screen real quick. This is just a quick flash up. And I don't want to go deep here, but just a surface for context, maybe help feed some questions later. This is the heart failure guidelines. We have 2013 heart failure stages of heart failure, and people may be familiar with this if you've played that in this space in the past. Heart failure is a leading killer, or not heart failure, but cardiac disease leading killer of folks nationally, internationally. So it's a big thing, right? In heart failure and structural heart disease is a big change from 2013 to 2022, where they really focused on more crisply describing stage B heart failure, which is what they kind of termed pre-heart failure, but it's when you have structural heart disease but no attributed symptoms at that point in time. For the most part, though, when we say heart failure and you look at coding and diagnosis, that really only reflects the folks that have stage C or D. And why that matters is coding and documentation, medical coding documentation. If I wanted to run ICD-10 codes around where any of these stages fall, you'll see that there's a Z code for stage A. I would venture to say it's probably not used or not adopted well. There's an ICD-10 code for stage D, end stage heart failure. Everything else is actually jammed together, and really stage B, if you were to code it without any other descriptors, it comes into I50.9. So think of population health. If I just run a code, see how many patients live there, I50.9 is heart failure unspecified. So it's kind of unsatisfying for that matter, right? Why would that matter? This is a study published in JACC that showed that, wow, even though the ontology which we use in from ICD-10 and even ICD-11 for that matter, that isn't impact in the U.S. yet. If I were to do this by stages, and it's a pretty large cohort, if I use the 2013 guidelines, you see the distribution here, and the end stage where we spend a lot of money, right, is still really only 3% of the outpatient population in this cohort. If you use the new 2022 guidelines, a lot more that are rising clinical risk. And so the reason why I say this is the foundation, you can't manage what you don't know about, right? And that's really where, and you look at some of the other guidelines, and I throw these up here, but again, back to that, what I mentioned is how long does it take clinical guidelines to hit practice? You'll see these things of actually saying people should be screened with an echo. Even those that are asymptomatic with heart failure or with hypertension might benefit from a screening echo. That's from 2010. There's not been any change in guidelines since then. Doesn't happen today, right? We got advocacy from the heart failure guidelines screening more. Same way for diabetics, all should be screened for heart failure. And so those you throw this from the European guidelines in cancer, you see that there's a mounting amount of evidence, but why is it not happening? And you look at nationally, internationally, there's a big shortage of sonographers. In the U.S., there's 74,000 sonographers, only 13,000 of which are cardiac trained. So it doesn't matter. We can wish in one hand and do something else in the other. We know what's going to happen. So we're just positioned for reactive care. At Caption, what we built is we have an AI. We're the first FDA cleared AI guided medical software where we're cleared for any medical professional to use this. You'll see the typical cone you'd see with an ultrasound, but on the right side is ultimately really the AI guidance for static guidance. You get AI, really GPS, almost like guidance of how to turn the probe right, left, up, down, etc. And then you ultimately get some feedback to the imager. And that's really where it comes into play, is to really get this is what the ideal image, this is actually what we'd be able to capture, and it will auto capture and really separate the image acquisition from the practice of medicine, which is interpreting that image. And so that is really what we built at Caption Care, is a means to actually deploy a workforce into the home or in the clinic to help drive this. And what I would say that over the last couple of years, we are doing this in multiple states, largely with fully capitated providers, but we're, with over 5,000 scans done, we have around 25 to 30% of those are actually coming up with stage B or worse heart failure, and using various criteria of who gets a scan. But again, it backs into, it's like, if we want to change, what barriers do we need to break down? Some of that is getting access to the right tools and training to be able to do this, to bring in and make ultrasound perhaps as one modality that's more ubiquitous, very similar to how we think of a stethoscope. But those are some things there. But I will pause there and make sure that we got room for everybody else to speak.
Okay, thanks. I think the interesting thing is that because recently I look at the FDA cleared AML enabled device. The FDA posted about 950 FDA cleared device, and then I look at the cardiovascular care side. There was about 96, and then I could not find years, because I think that why? Because you categorize as a radiology. So because the FDA doesn't care whether it's specifically the targeting cardiovascular whatever, because of you show me it's like it's kind of like a radiologist part. But
it's there. It may be under a different company. We originally founded as Bay Labs, was the company where it was submitted. Bay Labs then became Caption Health, but it should be that we have a de novo. We have both for the auto EF or for the guidance, and then the 510K for the evolution of that, and also PCCP for each of them. So
yeah, because I'm going to have another webinar next week about the main topic is like a generate AI enable like a medical device. Maybe just short time like a talk in interactive section about like whether it's any like a barrier to like adopt it, like enable like for example cardiovascular like a medical device, and then what kind of solution, because you are the right person can give the answer, right? So I'm very excited to hear from you. Go, Rebecca, you will take that. Okay, so next Kirsten.
Yeah, this is Carson Russell Wood. I have to say, just listening in here and probably framing it a little bit for the audience listener, we've gone through, many different parts of healthcare and parts of the journey of healthcare. I'll tell a little bit about my background and then make it relevant to what I'd like to focus on, which is going to be the acute hospital space, which is the ED to discharge. So my background, I generally like to say it went through 3 epochs. I spent a decade with GE, very focused on designing solutions, medical devices, which actually made me realize that the device and the box in the room was less significant and less valuable than the interoperability. And that led me to a second decade at Philips, where I focused on informatics and telehealth. I haven't aged myself in this video screen, so I haven't reached my 3rd decade, but I made a very purposeful move to Equimedical about 3 years ago, which transitioned me post-COVID from medical technology to healthcare workforce. And that's really what Equimedical does. If we look at the state of the hospital market, attributing broad statements here to Kaufman Hall, about 50% of hospitals are still operating in the red and negative margins. And that's coming from a very significant intersection of events. One, post-COVID, we have higher acuity patients. Those higher acuity patients are spending longer in the hospital. And by the way, through COVID, burnout of both physicians and nurses led to the adoption of greater agency labor, which increased the rate of labor for care delivery. And through all of that, we have an unsustainable situation going on in the US hospital system. All of that comes at a time when hospitals are looking to respond to workforce redesign by adopting technology, by adopting virtual care. And truly, that's where Equim is at the intersection of those two big trends. We see unsustainable financials. Hospital expenses are because of the patient acuity is continuing to increase. Workforce is a problem not only because we don't have enough of it and it costs too much, but also there is an imbalance, there's inequity in the distribution of our specialists across our country. So as Tom mentioned, if we look at mental health, if we look at cardiovascular health, we do see the fact that not every state, not every rural county has access to those resources. And through that, Equim and our telehealth-enabled physician base really focuses on solving the challenges of not enough staff. Also, the concept of delays in flow, right? We mentioned that patients are spending longer in the hospital. When patients spend a longer time in the hospital, that creates friction, and friction is waste. And we want to try and eliminate that waste to get the right patient to the right place and only for the right amount of time. I'd say probably within that inefficiency category, we still also see that there is a inefficiency in patient transfers, whether it's from critical access hospitals across our rural markets or actually within a larger integrated health system. Patient transfers cause patients to receive care that is not local. And when care isn't local, it affects not only the patient, it also affects the local hospital's revenue, and it also affects the community and the patient's family. So we try and solve those, and we try and solve those through telehealth. As we work with our hospital partners, one of our goals is to encourage innovation in staffing. We know that replacing burnt out staff with agency labor only increases care costs. And so if there are ways that we can leverage decentralized, distributed, technology-enabled clinical support, we're winning, and that's a goal. Secondly, through COVID and through some primary research I've done, health systems have adopted incredibly disconnected and fragmented telehealth networks. In one interview, a sizable integrated health network had over 32 different telehealth platforms. And there's no way to be efficient and move care through the continuum in those situations. So I'd say where my passion lies now and where we see the opportunity is to make care accessible and make access to care equal, whether or not you live in a rural or an urban setting. And we do that through telehealth. So I'm going to stop there and hopefully follow up with some questions later on, Alex.
Okay, thank you. I think that there may be, I want to hear from you is that, for example, that people hesitate to adopt technology, especially for the patient. if you usually actually Tom talk about like a virtual meeting, right? Because a virtual is a similar one, right? So I'm curious about how people's attitude about if you want to provide some virtual care, because usually people tend to see doctor in face to face, right? They prefer that. So how the barrier to adopt like the virtual care as a part of the mainstream care, and then what might be the solution for that? Because that will be a very interesting topic to discuss. Okay, so next, Jay.
Yep. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Alex. Thanks to the other panelists here. Let's see. So in the name of time, I'll try to speed things up a little bit to get to the Q&A. But let's see. So I have the privilege of working with really smart technologists, computer scientists, business leaders at Tanovi. And before I get into Tanovi, let me kind of reverse it. Let me lead with maybe the problem statements or some of the barriers that we're working with. And it's similar, I think, than with some of the other panelists here. And, you know, they're broad statements, but access to care and delivering actionable insights are two big challenges that I think everybody here can relate to in some way, shape, or form. And at Tanovi, we play in the RPM, the remote patient monitoring ecosystem, right? There's lots of different definitions to this, and I'll hopefully go a little bit deeper. Many people, you know, I hear a ton about RPM, and I always say that it's RPM is a 4-letter word, not a 3-letter word. As I hear people talk about where it's going or where it's been and where it's headed and why people are using it. But at Tanovi, you know, we play in that ecosystem, right? You've got connected devices, you've got software, care management. How do you deliver that care to people that that have a hard time getting to their clinician? Or more importantly, how do you get those insights to the providers? And so Tanovi plays in that space. We've got a cellular gateway hub that connects with 40 different point solutions. So the basic blood pressure monitors, glucose meters, scales, all of those physiological devices connect to our gateway, and we get that. We're an upstream data aggregator. We point it to the platform and we deliver it to the providers so they can do a couple things, right? They can, number one, keep the healthy patients at home, right? We don't want to crowd the system with patients that don't need to be there. And number two, we want to deliver insights or actionable data so a provider can either change their medication plan or modify it or get them in sooner, right? Or reward them with some type of, you know, gamification to that. So Tanovi plays in that world. We power, you know, 120 different software vendors that sell into that space, and we've got over 150,000 devices in the field today. But to go kind of another layer deeper, I think, you know, we look at RPM, and I look at RPM as not just the physiological parameters. I think they're very important and they're very helpful, but I think it's comprehensive, right? So you've got the physiological parameters. You also have the adherence to medication, right? And so being able to tie the parameters with the medication adherence, and then also activity, right? So you're not just living in that, you know, 1 or 2 chronic conditions. You're really managing it from a holistic standpoint that's comprehensive. So you've got the physiological side, you've got the activity side, you've got the medication adherence, and then the fourth, I think, is the dietary portion of this. We don't have a huge impact, but I think delivering these insights can be very helpful to change behavior that doesn't just begin with a BPM and blood pressure and some of those data points. So I'm excited to share more and learn from the panelists here, but I'll pass it over to you, Alex, and we'll keep moving.
Thank you. Okay, finally, Arashi.
Thanks, Alex. And in a similar spirit, I'll try and move things on so we can get to questions. So brief background, I'm Arash. I'm a pediatrician and academic. Spent some time working in the public sector where I've been overseeing some of that digital transformation on a national scale, but also working in the private sector, being on the manufacturer side of delivering that innovation and trying to actually sell it into the public sector. So spanning those two sides has brought to me quite a few interesting pieces of context. And I think there's two kind of key challenges that I see in this space that are very relevant across geographies and actually very relevant across therapeutic areas and settings. The first one is how we appraise and evaluate these digital tools. We're starting to now see that the methods that we're using are becoming fit for purpose from this. moving away from what was traditionally quite a strong paradigm from the pharmaceutical industry, which doesn't always work. You can't translate the same way you appraise medicines as you do digital technology. But I think we're getting much better as an industry at understanding how to evaluate things, but also trying to get learnings early, combining speed of getting to an answer, but also confidence in that answer. And it is getting better over time. And that then feeds into how good our decisions around reimbursement, funding, investment are going to be, because they all fundamentally stem from how good is the quality of the evaluation appraisal we're doing. And the second challenge, I think, is becoming increasingly apparent as many of these tools and innovations are scaling across geographies and indeed across borders, is the question around how do we innovate and implement across a breadth of different ecosystems. We're increasingly catering for patient needs that are broader than they were even, say, 2 years ago, certainly more 5 years ago. As digital health gets more and more ambitious, more and more things are added into the product request, and more things need to be able to be offered. And there's a general higher expectation from the customer, whether that customer is a patient, whether that customer is a clinician. And so understanding how we cater for that breadth and reducing some of the fragmentation we are starting to see in the digital ecosystem, that's a really important challenge. And it's being solved in some ways through collaboration, and in some ways, and I think these are possibly the most exciting ways, it's being solved by some really interesting technology. Traditional kind of integration with APIs, etc., but actually in some ways entirely brand new forms of technology that we're starting to see, entirely new operating systems that sit on top a number of these tools. And it's opening up a lot of really exciting doors. But then there's also the question around how we do that in support of our patients and in support of our staff. And I think a number of the panelists have spoken about the challenge of implementing digital in large workforces and bringing your people along with those innovations. And I think it's a huge importance over the next few years that as we start to see not just these things scaling, but actually entirely new technologies coming through, that co-production is going to be a really important theme throughout all of this. And I think without that, we're going to struggle to see the adoption and the buy-in that we really want in order to be able to get the scale and the ambition of digital that we all know we can achieve. So those, I would say, are the two challenges I see. It's kind of the challenge of evaluation, the challenge of implementation, but very much looking forward to the questions, and I'll hand back to you to kick that off.
Thank you, Arashi. So we only have 6 more minutes to finish. So unfortunately, Rebecca should leave before 1. So Rebecca, I think that it's good time to have the Rebecca's insight. He's amazing. So he has great insight. So how about share your insight just a few minutes? And then I prepare for this kind of situation. I have a solution for this. I already make it. So I think that I will give you the solution that how we continue our discussion after 1 p.m. So Rebecca, are you there? Yep.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So just share your insight because I want to hear you. So yeah, just a few minutes and then you can leave. And then as I told, I prepare we can continue this discussion after 1 p.m., right? I already have a solution for that.
But thank you so much, Alex. And I really valued everybody's comments. And I think I'll be reaching out to all of you about questions about some of the work that I'm currently doing at Color, building out a virtual cancer clinic. My reflection is that we really have multiple use cases for digital health and AI within this panel, from pharma and R&D to direct patient care. And the throughput I see is this need for good quality data, good appraisal of that data, and actionability. And I think that speaks to me as a data scientist of really being able to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it and when we're doing it. As an offshoot to that, I'm also struck by how the digital health capabilities and use cases are rapidly expanding to fill what seems like an ever-expanding space of the healthcare ecosystem. And at some point, that balloon is going to either pop or or just get full. So my question I'd love to leave the panelists with, in addition to Alex's questions, is when and why will we reach that limit, and what will happen? Anybody brave enough to take a start?
And I think we're a long way from that. First of all, I say that in whatever limits exist, they're different for people directly providing billable medical care versus people providing a technology, right? Right now, this is a very large umbrella that we're talking under. And on an investment basis, yes, people are going to overshoot the mark because there will be excitement, and then there will be overestimates, and then reality will come back and bite people. But in terms of changing healthcare, I think there are a lot of good reasons why this is going to continue to change healthcare, both inside and outside of the United States. Adoption of digital tools has been much stronger, and there's much more innovation outside of the US because of our CPT code driven environment, right?
Yeah.
Where, for those not familiar, if you can't bill for something, you basically can't implement it in the United States. And there are very successful digital therapeutics that are in use in the UK and Germany and around the English speaking world that don't have a CPT code, so you can't bill for them, and therefore nobody prescribes them to their patients in the United States. I think that's going to continue to change slowly because there are not powerful financial interests in favor of it changing the way I would argue it should. And that's frankly why I focus on companies that deliver billable care rather than very exciting innovations that might not. But going back to your question, is it going to blow up? I think there's enormous opportunity for growth driven in part by just the fact that our population is aging, and an aging population needs more medical care. And then the very different cost structures that all of these digital companies have. There's the medical center down in Houston is fantastic. And there's a great picture of a new hospital that they're building that has a canal under it or in front of it. And the problem with all of that, of course, is not only that they need to generate revenue that pays for the entire hospital, but they need to generate revenue that pays for the canal. Right. So that none of our companies have that problem, and it allows us to do things more efficiently and cheaper. And with that, I'll let it over to somebody else to talk.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. I think it's a great question, and I think Tom is right on point here. I mean, cost unfortunately pushes us, and ROI pushes us, or maybe it's good, faster than it did even 5 years ago. I think there were many different, whether it's a point solution or an idea that would solve a clinical issue, but if it didn't have an ROI to stand on, it wouldn't last. And I think that you're seeing that from, the number of investments that are going into the space as well. But, and I think that's what's exciting as well. Like if you have an ROI, it can move really fast. So that's the first part. And then I know there's some other people who want to chime in. And I think there's this simplicity effort into this as well. I think there can't be a lot of activation energy, and it's got to be easy from the provider, easy from the payer, and easy from the patient. And I think if you can kind of put that together, things will move faster than some complex generative AI formula. And we'll let the smart pharma people deal with that. But that's my 2 cents.
Rash, you had your hands up further than before.
Very kind, and I'll keep mine quick. I think so. I agree with the other points. I think what we have, although observed to date, and I think this will continue to happen, is almost some corrections within the industry. And I think we saw those corrections, particularly immediately when we came out of the pandemic, where there was this idea that because you had to digitize everything, digital products had a divine right to exist. And what we learned is that isn't the case. You have to digitize it in the right way. And then we learned that not only you have to digitize in the right way, but you have to do it in a way that's scalable. And what we then since learned is not only does it have to be scalable, but it actually has to have a commercial sustainable model. And I think soon what we're going to learn is it's got to work within the ecosystem of other tools. It's got to be interoperable. It can't contribute to fragmentation. And I think the next one we'll then see is around the evidence base. Are these things actually making a difference? So My view is there's a huge amount of scope for the industry to grow, but I think we will see a number of different corrections. And I think that's no bad thing. We will see the right solutions survive and thrive, and we will see ones that don't having to make those adjustments. And I think that's the right thing for the quality of care that we want for patients.
Yeah. Only thing I'll 100% I agree there. I mean, I think that you hit the nail on the head. It's a sustainable business model. Unfortunately, you think about internationally, you have some groups that are single payer systems, and you get them in there, you have the mechanism roll through. I think the problem with it, healthcare compared to maybe some of the other maybe financial industry or things like that, the revenue cycle complexities of billing. Just use the U.S. as an example. It's not something that you could just step into overnight and understand. I mean, understanding like inpatient billing versus outpatient billing, difference between revenue cycle, site of care issues, whether we're talking the ED, did they get discharged? Did they actually get admitted? What happens to the billing there? And then you open up the outpatient. You start all kinds of mess. And you see some things that, yes, the digital health kind of and virtual health took off in the middle of the pandemic, and now you see things kind of reeling back a little bit. Maybe it's a purposeful pause. Is maybe what I'll think about is like the actuary starting taking a look at data, and then do we need to start segmenting billing codes, maybe a little bit different for around use cases to figure out the right sizing of those things. I would question too. I mean, I don't know if folks are aware of even the like RVUs, what that means to physician productivity, whether that talks about their direct compensation or other means of productivity measurement. I mean, you could argue that technical adoption of some of these pieces, that's of value to the broader system if it's creating value, right? And so does that need to be revisited? It's not part of the equation today, but there's a number of things here. It just speaks to the fact that, we're at the beginning, we're nowhere near the end. But I think a lot of great work ahead.
Thank you. So we are going to stop now, and then I will give you my solution. Actually, I already made a LinkedIn group. The name is Digital Health as a Mainstream Forum. So it's actually the same thing, the topic. So my idea is that I send out to all of you attendees, speakers, and then even the other my network to join the group. And then I invite you to leave whatever your insight or whatever you want to share, and then post it. And I would like to also ask Rebecca to share her insight and any further like a question he want to have with you. And then we will keep continuing. So I'm going to share the recording, and then I'm going to share that we have a continuation of this discussion. And then I'm going to invite you all to share your insight, and then we have a further discussion. And then you can, if you have some specific like issues or the other like things you want to share, then I can be a channel. So that I have this kind of event for years. I have a lot of the audience already, and then in my list I have at least 1,000 actually at least in the digital health space. So I can send out directly that we form the discussion forum at LinkedIn, and all the speakers will be joined, and then leave your like a question or you want to exchange idea with each speakers, they can join. So that's the way actually we can continue. Right? How about that? Yeah, okay, thank you. So as you see in my background, today is Halloween. So thank you for everyone to attending, especially for the speakers. And happy Halloween. Thank you.
Happy Halloween.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.